What, if anything, lasts forever? What is impervious to the ravages of time? Here's a real question for you. What can you do today? What could you do this week that will still matter 100 years from now? Is there anything you could do today? Is there anything you could do this week that people would still be talking about 100 years from now? Now, I'm in that headspace thinking about these questions since May 13th. And May 13th is the day because that is the day that a great Canadian writer named Alice Munro died. Alice Munro was a master of the short story genre. Alice Munro won the Nobel Prize for Literature in 2013. And I have to confess, I had never read Alice Munro until her death on May 13th, and then all of the tributes just compelled me to start reading one of her collections of short stories. And the Alice Munro book that I picked came out in 2009, and it is called Too Much Happiness. And as you might imagine, the title, Too Much Happiness, is wry, is ironic, because the characters in this collection do not exactly suffer from the problem of too much happiness. They suffer from just the opposite problem. For example, the story that most grabbed me is about a woman named Nita, who is married to a husband who's older than her, named Rich. And Nita and Rich both imagined that she would be the one who died first because she was combating cancer and because Rich had just been to the doctor and he had just received a clean bill of health from his doctor. And shortly after getting that clean bill of health, while on the way to the hardware store, he just dies, totally suddenly and totally unexpectedly. And then Nita is left to grapple with a whole new life. And it dawns on her that her life did not just change temporarily. Her life changed permanently. Rich is not coming back. The patterns that they had enjoyed together the years of their marriage, they're not coming back. Who she was, a core part of her identity, was Nita, the wife of Rich, was not coming back. And then she realized the changes were more than that. She thought at first, okay, I'll just read more. I love to read, don't have as much time to read when he was alive, so I'll just read more. And she starts sitting in her comfy chair, and she's got all of her books, and she starts to read, and she realizes, I can't read like I used to read because all of my medical treatments have affected my attention span. Now, when you can't do what you used to do, and when you can't be who you used to be, is happiness still possible? Is happiness still possible when the circumstances of your life change? Now, this story about Nita and Rich spoke to me. It entered my heart because it captured a core dilemma that I am wrestling with and that I feel that many of us are wrestling with, which is that it feels like the world is changing, and it feels like our world is changing, and we don't know whether it is changing temporarily, and we're going to get to go back the way it was. Eventually, Israel's going to go back to the way it was. It's going to be October 6th, but stronger. Or maybe the American Jewish story is going to go back the way it was. It's going to be October 6th, but stronger. And our relationships with our alma maters, so many of them had graduation ceremonies that were interesting this week. And it's going to go back the way it was, and maybe even stronger. The changes are temporary, or maybe they're not temporary. Maybe they're permanent. Maybe it's not going back. And the thing is, it's just hard to know. The thing is, nobody knows. And you already know that nobody knows. Because just think about what life was like in the pandemic. Think what it was like in the heart of the pandemic. Go back to March of 20, or April of 20, or May of 20, or any of the schlepping along, the ups and downs. And we wondered and we worried, hey, are we ever going to get back to normal? Hey, are we ever going to gather in big, happy, robust gatherings again without masks and without worry again ever? And of course now we know. Now we know the answer. But at the time we did not know the answer. And the problem is the recency bias, the power of the recency bias. The moment that we are in is just so powerful. We don't really know what's going to be on the other side of the moment. And so for all those questions, will Israel be okay? Will the American Jewish story be okay? Is our golden age over or not? And if it isn't, it's coming back, what will that mean? Will our relationships with our alma maters ever be uncomplicated and loving again? We just don't know. What do we do about that? What do we do about the fact that there's so many big questions about our home and about our homeland that we don't know the answer to? How do we think about that? And what do we do with that pit in our stomach? And do we have a move? Do we have a move that's honest, real, deals with the world the way it is, and can help us get past the pit in our stomach in the face of big questions we don't have the answer to? So, I couldn't find the answer in Alice Munro's fiction, though Nita's story teed up the question. But the good news is, I did find a super helpful response in Rabbi Jonathan Sachs's commentary to our portion Parshat Bahar. What he said, it's just so worth your time to be in shul to hear what Jonathan Sachs had to say about our Torah portion. Rabbi Sachs says that Bahar has two big themes. Theme number one, Israelites do not get to own the land that they own forever. When Israelites own land, it's just temporary. So let me just quote, "V'ha'aretz lo timacher litzmitut." The land must not be sold beyond reclaim. You don't get to own it forever. Ki li ha'aretz, because the land belongs to me, God. Ki gerim v'toshavim atem imadi. You're just strangers temporarily in the land. In other words, Israelites can't own their land forever, which kind of cues us to the fact that nothing lasts forever. The home that we live in now, we will not own forever. Somebody else is going to own that home. And the car that we drive, we don't drive forever. Somebody else is going to drive that car, or else it'll be in the junkyard. And the job we do, we don't get to do forever. Somebody else is going to do that job. And so point one of Bahar is transience, just is. The human condition is transient. Rich is transient. Nita and Rich's marriage is transient. The chapter they had of happy married life is transient. Transient just is. Point one of Bahar. Point two of Bahar is, and Micha talked about this so beautifully, Shemitah. Shemitah means release, letting go. And in the portion's context, it is that the Israelites are to work the land for 6 years. For 6 years they reap, for 6 years they sow, and in year 7 they let it go. They let it lie fallow. And every 50th year, they don't collect the debts. They let the debts go too. And here's what Rabbi Sachs does. He connects these two teachings. He says, the transience of life, the fact that nothing lasts forever, is the problem, and release, letting go, Shemitah, is the answer. So he has this really cool book called Judaism's Life-Changing Ideas, and here is his life-changing idea for Bahar. In life, ask not, what can I gain, but what can I give? Be a blessing to others, and you will find that life has been a blessing to you. So that question I started with, what lasts forever? That question I started with, what is it that we can do today that will matter and be talked about 100 years from now? The answer is the things we give away, the energy we give away, the kishka in our heart, the resources, the passion, what we care about, that's not about us, it's larger than us, that we give away, that is what lasts. And our community saw a vivid example of that just this week. On May 20th, 1929, a woman named Rosalie Whitehill was born. And on May 20th, 2024, 95 years to the day later, 95 years after her birthday, this past Monday night in the Gant Chapel, was a celebration of Rosalie Whitehill's life. And Rosalie literally embodies the two lessons of Parshat Bahar. Number one, nothing lasts forever. Number two, except what we give lasts forever. So Rosalie was, if you knew her, absolutely irrepressible, indomitable, and resilient. If anyone was going to live forever, it was going to be Rosalie, but it turns out nobody gets to live forever. And so after 94 years and 360 days, God called her soul. Health and life don't last forever. Now, Rosalie loved learning. In fact, she moved to LaSalle because she loved learning, and she was always jazzed about classes. But learning and intellectual attainment do not last forever. And Rosalie loved exercise. She used to be very proud of the fact that she was the strongest 80-year-old at LaSalle. And then she graduated, and she was very proud of the fact that she was the proudest 90-year-old, 90-something at LaSalle. But physical strength does not last forever. And nobody in the history of the human race ever has been able to figure out how to exercise their way to immortality. So, health and life don't last forever. Intellectual attainment and learning does not last forever. Working out and cardio and sweating and health and strength and physical doesn't last forever. What does last forever? What we give away lasts forever. So here's Rosalie. She's in her 80s. She's in her 90s. And when other people do snowbirding in Florida, what she does is she flies to Israel by herself for 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 2 months of service projects. She goes to Israel, she flies there by herself, she gets a place by herself, she lives by herself, she cooks by herself, and she does service by herself every year in her 80s and 90s. And then one year, Nebuch, she falls, she breaks her elbow, has to figure out how to fly home by herself, gets back, has surgery, recovers. The people say, you know, Rosalie, give it a rest, you've done your share. She was on the plane the next February. She was on the next plane the next February. And that matters at the time for all these Israelis who saw this 80-year-old, 90-year-old Energizer Bunny, and she came during the Second Intifada when Americans weren't coming. But it doesn't only matter at the time, it matters for all time. Because there's a whole community out there of children and grandchildren and LaSalle and Temple Emmanuel that's inspired by her to ask, what can I do for Israel? Rosalie Whitehill was passionate about civil rights and seeing and advancing the dignity of all. She personally integrated the dining halls of Indiana University in the 50s and 60s. She was white, and she had friends who were black, and they would go white and black to dining hall after dining hall, and she would say, I will not leave until you serve both of us. And in that way, she integrated the dining facilities of Indiana. And that mattered at the time, and it matters for all time, because it inspires all of us to think, how do we promote human dignity for all? And here, she's in her 80s. LaSalle has never done this before. She says, we need to have a bus at Pride. We need to have a LaSalle contingent at Pride. And she puts the Pride flag on the bus, and she puts the Pride flag up at LaSalle. And that matters at the time and for all time, because it inspires all of us to love people for who they are. I want to come back to the pit in our stomach. There's a pit in our stomach. Because there's all this big stuff, all these big questions that we can't control. And there's a pit in our stomach because there's all these big questions that we don't know the answer to. And so what do? And here's the answer. There is a paradox. It is a beautiful paradox. It is a powerful paradox. And we are in total control of this paradox no matter what happens in the world at large that we can't control. And the paradox is just this. The love and goodness and energy that we give away is ours and our children's and our children's children and our communities forever. Shabbat Shalom.